So welcome everyone. My name is Leanna Levine Reisner. I am the Network Director of Plant Powered Metro New York, and so glad to see you all this evening. Plant Powered Metro New York is a community-based organization that's committed to our collective health empowerment through whole food, plant-based nutrition. This is an evidence-based approach to nutrition that can prevent, treat, and even reverse chronic illness. So while we normally prefer to offer live sessions that build community around health and nutrition, we're offering this program as part of a web series during the season of COVID-19. We're really glad you've come to learn with us today and to find community despite our social distancing. Tonight, we invite you to use the chat box as we go to share questions that you have, but at the outset, just to share who you are, where you're from, and what you hope to learn today. Please do mute your lines if you haven't. And I will be taking questions in the chat box and may intersperse them in Varun's demo, but most of the questions we'll save to the end just to allow him to have a good flow for his program. And I invite those of you who are ready to cook along with him, and maybe we'll check in on you at the end and see how each of your dishes have come along. Today's program features Varun Ponmudi, who is the founder of Aaya's Table. He can tell you a little bit more about this, but he's going to be presenting South Indian dishes as we've described it for the Homebound, as all of us are. Varun, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Lana. And thank you for the wonderful web series that you've put together, that you and the Plant Powered team have put together. I think all of us can attest to how nice it has been to be able to continue working on that plant-powered community together while we're all stuck at home. I'm really excited to be here. So Aaya's Table is a whole foods, plant-based cooking service. Our focus is really on working with physicians to help patients who are dealing with chronic illness make those lifestyle changes. So we offer a culinary rehabilitation program where we have our chefs go into the home and do basically a weekly meal prep for anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 months, depending on what an individual needs, kind of give them that little kickstart and jumpstart into the plant-based life. The inspiration for Aaya's Table is South Indian cooking. Aaya is a South Indian word in Tamil for grandmother, and that's where a lot of my Indian home-style dishes really originate from, between my grandmother and my mom. So what we're going to be doing today is something called keerai. In a lot of Indian restaurants, you may hear other names for it. There's different variations. Khichdi is one, parupu is another, but essentially it's a lentil and spinach-based stew. One of the wonderful things about Indian cooking, very flavorful, full of spices. What's nice about this is actually it's going to be really just a handful of spices that you may already have in your kitchen. And in terms of the other ingredients, again, it's frozen spinach. We wanted to keep it as simple as possible, but still so that you could still enjoy some of those South Indian flavors. So to start us off, I'm going to basically show you the lentils that we use. If you had a chance to look through the ingredients list, I included something called masoor dal. This is essentially a red lentil. So this is the Goya brand version, and you'll notice that it's actually not red or pink, it's actually green. So this is the shelled version. And when we talk about dal, D-A-L, D-H-A-L, there's so many variations of spelling. We're talking about lentils, beans, chickpeas that have been basically processed to have that shell removed or the casing removed. So the masoor dal is typically a red color. That's what actually you would find. It's the same species, right? Same type of lentil, just without that shell. And the shell does a number of things. It is a little harder to digest, and of course it adds cooking time. So starting with that de-shelled lentil or that dal allows us to speed up the process. I actually couldn't find the shelled version in the stores, as I'm sure many of you have dealt with. There's a big shortage with the lockdowns. So I'm actually using a golden lentil. And again, the key, so this is also pigeon pea or tur dal. So same idea, it's been shelled. I'll bring it up for a little closer. You can see in comparison to the shelled, it's a little thinner, a little smaller in size. And again, it's going to cut down your cooking time pretty significantly. One of the traditions in Indian cooking is using a pressure cooker. Many of you are probably familiar with the Instapot, and that's a very similar idea, more modern iteration of that pressure cooker. We're not going to do anything like that. So that's one of the reasons I requested you guys, if you are cooking along, to prepare the dal in advance. Now, pressure cookers, again, speed up that process. Where did I put it? There it is. So I cooked some of the dal in advance, and so this is what it looks like. Essentially 30 minutes on the stovetop, let it boil and then simmer, much like rice. And you'll actually see it's almost kind of like a mush. So I did mash it up a little bit. And again, as we're making that stew, it gets nice and soft, and it's going to have a much easier consistency to digest, and it also helps with the flavor. Some people do think that slow cooking it this way is more flavorful than going with a pressure cooker. So, you know, if that's something that you're keen on, trying to enhance those flavors, taking that extra time is a big benefit. So with that ready, I have this spinach out to thaw. Again, I'm using just a very standard off-the-shelf frozen pack of spinach. I've actually had this out for a little bit. If you're short on time, honestly, you don't even need to thaw it out. You can just throw it right on the stovetop when we're ready to introduce it. It will just take a little bit of extra time to fully cook. So with those things ready, we're actually going to start with the famous South Indian bread, chapatis. So one of the wonderful things about these breads is they've been around for, I think, over 6,000 years. If you look at history, there's notes of them. These are the little round flatbreads that you may have seen pictures of on Plant Power's post or my post. And actually, I have one that's cooked up already. So you'll see the final product. What's wonderful about these, will function just like a tortilla, but I think they're more flavorful. I've always enjoyed these more than rice growing up as a kid. It is whole wheat by nature. There are variations now where folks do use, you know, bleached and processed white flour, but the whole wheat is really the authentic way to go about it. So again, we're hitting that Whole Foods target just naturally. Traditionally, it's also only 2 ingredients: whole wheat flour, again, just the store-bought brand, and water. I'm going to add just a pinch of salt, a little bit of extra flavor. Again, if you look back at the history of it, it did not actually have salt. It was used as a plain, just a plain bread. So I have 2 cups of whole wheat flour in here, and I have about 3/4 cups of slightly warmed water, and I'm just going to start pouring it in and start mixing and kneading by hand for a few minutes. So hopefully you can see this okay. I might just actually do a little bit of this and then bring it over closer so that you can see what's going on. There's really, I don't know that there's a great form to this, and certainly I never picked up, but really if you go slow enough, make sure you don't add too much water. If you do, you can always add a little bit more flour. If you add too little flour, add a little bit more, add a little bit more water. Again, it's kind of equals out. Really what you're looking for is a pretty soft consistency. You'll see right off the bat, it starts clumping and falling apart. As I start mixing in the water and kneading with my hands, kind of a gentle motion like this, it'll start coming together and sticking a little bit.
Varun, there's been a question. I think I want to bring it to your attention now. Are there other flours that folks can use if they're gluten-free, brown rice or an almond flour? What would you recommend?
I actually personally don't have any experience with it, but I do know people that make rotis out of gluten-free flour. So one of the reasons I'm kneading this bread is it helps strengthen the gluten fibers, and that it gives you the shape and the form. So that's something that maybe I can look into a little bit after we do this demo, and I can send some information out. I think there are pre-made gluten-free rotis and flatbreads that you can get, though. Those might not be as easy to make by hand. So for any of you who have made pizza dough at home, you know, it's a very similar process. Again, just from seeing my grandmother do it, you know, we don't put it on the board or anything. We just do it straight in the bowl. And I think pizza dough, typically you're going 5-10 minutes, you're getting it really, really smooth. With this, you know, kind of pushing in with my knuckles, folding over probably for about half of that time, not quite as much. I'll bring this up a little closer. You can start seeing it's starting to get that nice shape to it. Still on my fingers a little bit, and that's kind of one of the nice telltale signs is once it starts to not stick as much, you know, it's getting closer to being ready. So again, going back to the history of the chapati. So chapati, roti, those are kind of the two traditional words that I wind up using. Again, different breads have a little bit of a different formulation to them. So in Indian restaurants, you would have heard of naans, which are typically cooked in a clay oven. This one is meant for basically just a flame or a flat top. So like a non-stick pan. And the origination was essentially not just food, but also a vessel for transporting food. So a lot of travelers going abroad from India, you know, I think parts of East Africa also had this bread as a tradition. And then in the Indus Valley, the Egyptian Indus Valley, around again another 5,000 years ago, this was a very common food for travelers. Again, it's very filling, right? It's whole wheat flour, and it holds together well enough that they would essentially make these breads, fill them with sometimes water, you know, if they didn't have something else to carry water or other foods, wrap it up, and they would transport it to go in a cloth or a bag of some sort. And that's part of the reason why, you know, this type of bread has become so familiar across the globe. It's just been one of those that's been transported all around. So I don't know if it's that I'm out of shape, but this is hard work. I think I said gently massage it, but it's actually pretty vigorous. And I'm really pushing my fist in and folding over pretty hard here. So what we're looking for again is that smooth shape. And then when you push your fingers in, you want it essentially to dimple and to stay in place. And like I mentioned before, if you feel like you've got the ratios a little bit off, or even if you didn't and it feels a little too sticky, you can add just another touch of flour, or vice versa, a little bit of water in there as well. So this quantity, this is 2 cups of flour, is going to give us just about 12 pieces of that bread. And me personally, I would say, you know, 2 pieces is pretty sufficient for a meal. They're very filling. I always think about cooking things like this, and again, I'm talking about feeling tired, but this is something I've seen my grandmother do countless times and my mother do countless times for large parties, making, it must be, you know, 50, 100 of these things. So a lot of respect there. So yeah, I think we've gotten to a pretty good place. Again, with the Indian breads, and typically don't need to knead them into an extremely smooth form. This tends to do the trick. So what I'm going to do next is to help continue this forming process. I'm going to wet a paper towel. If you have a rag, you can do that as well. And we're just going to cover the bread and set it aside for about 15 to 20 minutes. So what I'm doing here is I'm just wetting a paper towel completely, wringing it out all the way, and then putting that over top. Actually, I need one more piece.
Varun, would you ever add spices to the dough?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, depending on what kind of flavor you want, you can add spices. Some people will add nuts. A lot of the Indian breads that are stuffed with potato, they tend to do that as well. They'll add some cooked potato a little bit later in the stage, right before they're cooking it. So kind of like a filling. Some of the more, again, when you go to a lot of restaurants, they'll wind up, again, this is just water, a pinch of salt. I actually didn't add salt to this, so even better. You can add a little pinch of salt for flavor or some spices. A lot of restaurants will add a little bit of oil, but again, that's something that we're trying to avoid. It's also unnecessary, and it's pretty frankly, it's not traditional. Oil has always been an expensive commodity in India, in Asia all around. So a lot of the traditional foods typically don't use it. When they do use oil, it tends to be very small amounts that are cold pan pressed, which actually keeps a lot of the nutritious properties in place in comparison to what you would find in a traditional store-bought brand. All right, so I have my little cheat sheet up here. So when I'm looking over, that's what I'm doing. So we're going to leave that for about 10-15 minutes. So now we're ready to get to the stew. So I already have some of the ingredients out. It's that spinach, which is thawing. We're going to use 1 onion. This is a yellow onion. It's going to be a little bit sweeter for this recipe. That's just a personal preference. Again, if you use a red onion, white onion, and that's actually totally fine. It'll just change the flavor composition ever so slightly. I'm using 5 cloves of garlic. It's just one of those things for me where a lot of garlic is a good thing. If you want to cut down garlic, if you have ginger that you want to throw in here, you're welcome to do that as well. And then I have these dried red chilies. So these are the dehydrated red chilies. You'll usually find these in your spice section in a grocery store. If you don't have these, you can use serrano peppers, jalapenos, or if you're averse to spice, no chilies at all. But these tend to add a little bit more of that authentic flavor. So I'm actually just going to start cutting away here. If we have any questions, it's probably a good time to, I can definitely address them as well. I see that chat box lighting up.
Yeah, there had just been a question about whether there's yeast or baking powder in anything, but it seems like a very simple flour preparation.
Yep, nothing of the sort. And again, what's going to be interesting is when I start cooking that roti, you'll see it rise a little bit. You'll see it bubble. And that's just the pockets of air within the strands of gluten. But yeah, because we're not making a big, loaf of bread, we don't need really any additional ingredients like yeast that you typically find in a loaf of bread. One of the things I've picked up from a lot of the chefs that I've been working with, great tip is when you're doing garlic, is to actually just chop off the top and then use your knife to kind of push down, and the skin just kind of falls off. It's like an eggshell or something. So, just to show you again, I just chopped that top root off, and then I am pushing down with the knife a little bit. And you'll see it just immediately kind of peels away. Much more easily than trying to peel it by hand and getting stuck in between your fingers. So I'm cutting these all in advance, but really this is in Tamil, which is this part of South India that my family is from. We call it a thali. Other folks use different names for it, but it's basically one of the standard bases for the majority of Indian food that we tend to eat. It's a garlic, ginger, onion, and at home we've, again, being in the 21st, 20th century, we've typically cooked with a little bit of oil, and we'll fry the onion, garlic, ginger base. But again, going back, water frying, water sauteing was a pretty traditional thing to be doing. And when they did use oil, it tended to be grapeseed and rapeseed oil, which I think a lot of studies are finding are at least comparatively better than your vegetable oil and even your olive oil. So this base, this thali, is actually going to be one of the second things that we start cooking. The first thing is going to be the dry spices. And these are the whole spices that are in the ingredients list. So that's the mustard seed and the cumin seed, which we'll get to in a minute here.
Is that 4 cloves?
Yes, you're right. I missed a clove.
Ah.
Well, I guess you can see well enough. Yeah, it got blended in with the tacos here. Thank you for catching that.
It wasn't me, it was our amazing audience.
Is that right? I guess everyone's being very attentive. Is anyone out there cooking along? Or everyone kind of just observing today?
Oh, Doris is cooking along with us. If you are, and I can't see you, put your name in the chat and we'll check in with you at the end.
Yeah, I will say that one of the nice things about this dish is that spinach flavor, and especially if your palate has started to change from becoming mostly plant-based, I feel like a lot of the vegetables and they tend to have so much flavor that maybe you wouldn't have noticed before eating a lot of, as I used to, standard American diet. So just that combination of lentils, onion, garlic, and spinach is just a wonderful flavor, and that's before you even, look at any of the spices that we're going to be adding to it. A really simple dish.
Looks great. And I maybe I'll interject as you're chopping for those who are newer to oil-free plant-based cooking. The reason we encourage everyone to try to go oil-free is because of the health impact of oil on function and the calorie density of oil. Oil being the most calorie dense ingredient that we could eat, and we just don't need it. And as Varun is showing us, there are many ways that you can prepare dishes with the same integrity. Although we'll have to learn a little bit from you about how you bump up those spices, the flavors, without the oil.
Yeah, it's very meticulous compared to when you throw down oil. You can kind of turn away a little bit, and it helps you along a lot more. But with a little patience, it does release a lot of the flavors from the spices. I think, quite honestly speaking, it's a little different than with oil. Oil has just a different chemistry with the spices themselves, but it's actually still really wonderful without it. Trying to keep my workspace a little bit neat. Normally I don't, but I feel pressure too because I'm on camera. It's a mess.
No pressure.
It's usually, my fiance and I, we spent a good half hour working through how I was going to not clutter the camera view with dirty dishes and my mess, as I usually do.
And there was another question for the chapatis. Would you be able to use like a spelt flour, something with a little less gluten in it perhaps, or do you recommend something high gluten?
No, I think you can definitely do it. It's just going to give you a little bit of texture. And what you'll see is when we start cooking them, the way that it bubbles and rises, it's not going to have that same kind of look or feel to it, but it'll still be really tasty. I mean, again, right, traditionally this is using the most basic ingredients to come together to hold the, really the bigger part of the meal, which is that curry and that stew that we're going to be making. It's a joke that I've always made, is that, the bread is just a vessel for, instead of using a spoon, we use the bread to basically eat Indian food, but it's genuinely true. So I'm just going to chop up this onion, going to dice it up. As much as I love cooking, I'm still incredibly slow with a lot of these basic tasks. So by the time I'm done with the onion, I'm very likely going to be in tears.
Varun, are there other, we have like yellow onions and very standardized vegetables that we put in our sautés and curries. And what would be, is it traditional to use like a yellow onion in Indian cooking, or are there other varieties that are more common?
No, it really depends. Part of this was just also out of necessity when it was in the stores. My mom a lot of times uses red onions, and also even regionally in India, you'll find that different onions are used for different foods. So despite, again, for a lot of the South Indian food, the spicier onions, red onions especially, tend to be commonplace. Again, this one is going to give me a little bit of a sweeter flavor to it. And again, I think it's something that, again, as you're cooking through these recipes, it's something you can experiment with. It's whatever you have at home, or where you feel like using. You could even use shallots, honestly.
Yeah, thanks for showing us a meal that's, easy to prepare in these interesting times for shopping.
Yeah, I think there's really great substitutes for anything that we're using today. So whether it's the type of flour, whether you have all the spices or not. So if you were short on time or you didn't have a chance to cook those lentils, by the time you get all of this ready, those would be ready. So again, if it weren't for the demo, when I'm typically doing it, I prepare it all at the same time. So now we're going to jump to these spices, which is probably the fun part. And you can move that closer. Shift the camera over here. All right, so one of the things about oil-free cooking is a non-stick pan is a godsend, extremely helpful. Actually, just so we're all aware, this is I'm going to put a little product plug-in. No relation to them. This is a hop tea company. It's tea flavored with hops. So this is a white tea, and it is one of my favorite drinks. That's what you see in the back here, another beer can, just so we're clear. So oil-free sauteing onions is one thing, but going with the spices I would call a very different challenge. So the onion garlic base is usually a little bit later on, but where we're going to start is basically I'll call it an order of operations with spices. So the whole spices we're going to go in first, and we're essentially going to toast them. These are the ones that are going to release a lot of flavor and a lot of aroma. So I have cumin seed here and mustard seed here. I have about I think a half teaspoon of cumin and a little more than a quarter teaspoon of mustard seed. Again, we're really looking at which one cooks the fastest and which one burns to decide what to put on first. And in this case, the mustard goes on first. It does cook up a little bit slower than the cumin will. I'm going to turn this pan on to high. You're going to basically look for a couple of things when you're cooking these spices. So you're tempering the spices. So I think in northern India, they call it a tadka. In South India, it's called a thali. But these mustard seeds are going to start changing color, and they're going to start releasing a fragrance. So that's going to be one of the first signs that it's getting ready to come off the heat. And then they'll start popping, and they'll actually start popping all over the place, very much like popcorn. So I have a lid handy just in case. I usually especially when you're doing it without oil, I think it's a little bit more unpredictable to toast these spices. So I'm going to just keep that on hand to keep things from getting a little too out of control. So the order of operations: whole spices, onion, garlic, chili pepper, and then once we get the dal and the spinach in, then we can add the spices that have already been ground up. Now, if you don't feel comfortable in doing this, you can actually just grind these spices up individually and add them on later with your ground up spices. So just to really want like a high heat on here, so I usually just do a little tiny splash of water to see how hot that pan is. So again, we're starting at a medium, closer to high heat to toast these whole spices, and then we'll turn it down a little bit before we put the onion and garlic in. So I'm going to leave that mustard on there for about 30 seconds or so. Keep that lid close by. I almost think that I should let a couple of these pop so that you can see. There's a lot of fun trying to catch them once they hit the floor. And actually, you can all, I'm not sure if you can see on the camera, but they're starting to brown up a little bit already. So I'm going to throw in the cumin seeds. And then you don't have the luxury of the smell test. Well, for those of you that are cooking at home, this is the time to put your face in there. I mean, be careful not to let it pop in your face. But yeah, take a nice whiff. You'll see that aroma starting to come out. And you're starting to see some of the popping already. So I'll keep the lid on. So I'm going to turn that heat down to medium. I'm going to bring over the onion and garlic. So now again, for those of you used to cooking with oil, we're going straight into that oil, but what I am going to do is I have some water on hand. I'm going to add just a little bit for the moment. With a nonstick pan, it's a lot easier to manage. And you're just looking for the onions to start becoming translucent. They're not going to brown the same way that you would with oil. In a nonstick pan, you'll start to see a little bit of the browning occurring, in which point I usually kind of just scrape it off, add a little bit more water as it begins to evaporate. And if you're cooking along with us, you should have this wonderful smell, which is so familiar to me from cooking with my grandmother and my mom. This is that traditional Indian base, that tadka or thali, all coming together now. Handle the chilies.
Varun, can you repeat what you just said? As you go farther from the screen, it's harder to hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, I was saying, I was mindful not to touch the chilies early on, and usually I wind up rinsing my fingers afterwards, just because inevitably I wind up touching my eyes or my nose and getting irritated. So you can start seeing the pan is starting to get a little dry. So I'm going to add a little bit more water. I'm adding about a tablespoon each time. And then I'm going to those places that are starting to stick a little bit. You can see like slightly brown. I collect a little bit of that. Touch more of the water.
If you turned a light on, could you actually turn it off, because it was a little easier to see without?
Okay. Any better?
Almost.
Let me adjust that a little bit.
Oh, that's better.
There we go. That's better.
Oh, okay. Better? I think so. Yeah, we're directly under one of the lights here.
It's better in the dark.
Yeah, actually, yeah, right? Getting enough light from there.
And there was a question, did you ask us to prepare the lentils ahead of time just for time's sake, or do you also prepare the lentils separate in your
So I usually prepare them at the same time. I just did it for time's sake. From a kitchen utensil standpoint, I didn't want to I would have had to have washed one of my pots. So I just figured it'd be easier to have it all ready on hand. So you can start to see they're starting to get a little translucent. We're going to give it another minute or so. And depending on how the light is hitting, the pan's pretty, the onions, again, starting to release a little bit of water as well. The garlic is not burning up. It's got a nice starting to brown color. So I'm okay. I'm going to hold off on water for now. I find that there's a fine balance in trying to keep it from burning. If you add a little too much water, it makes it a little soggy, and I don't think you get quite as much of the flavor from the spices released. And that's one of the things with oil, is it's helping the aroma and the spice flavor to really seep out and kind of almost infuse the oil. So for those of you cooking at home, probably about time to start getting that spinach ready. Like I said before, if it's still fully frozen, that's okay. You can throw it right in. It'll just take you a little longer to get it cooked up.
And James piped in. He's one of Varun's kitchen coaches. He's saying if you have a spice grinder, you can blend the spices, cook the onions, and then add the spices.
Absolutely, that's great advice, and that again saves us a lot of the hassle from earlier. Yeah, I'm not quite thawed out. We'll throw that in there and we'll let it cook out.
Varun, if we were doing this with fresh spinach, how would we do it?
Very much the same way. I would just keep it on the stove top for a few shorter minutes. So probably a minute or so just to get the spinach kind of starting to wilt down, and then you would go right ahead and add the dal. So in my case, my spinach is not quite thawed, so I'm going to give it another 2 minutes or so until it starts, so I can break it apart with my spatula before I start adding the dal and the other spices in. And you'll also see, again, one of the other techniques, I think, with cooking without oil, you don't quite get a break. Constantly kind of stirring to make sure it's not sticking. So most nonstick work, I'm using a ceramic coated nonstick pan, which has been one of my favorites. It was just, I think it was one of the top ones on Amazon. That's been really, really handy. If you're doing this with a traditional stainless steel, it is possible. You may just find that the water especially starts to burn a little bit. You just have to be a little bit more mindful, and it winds up being harder to clean. A little extra help to break apart the spinach.
You have so many experiences doing this. Raise your hand if you've done this before with your spinach.
Really? So Leanna is sharing. So I don't think you. Okay. Got it.
And Varun, while you're waiting for it to thaw, will you share a little bit more about some of the South Indian geography so we can learn, regional variations, things that, yeah.
Yeah, so my family, so India is kind of a not symmetrical triangle in shape. So I'm from Chennai, which is the very southern tip. It's actually the southeastern tip. And the state is probably, it's the largest state in India, called Tamil Nadu. And
much like we'll say Texas, there's a strong sense of independence from the rest of the nation in Tamil Nadu. So there's a very unique culture compared to the rest of India. So many of you will be familiar. National language for India is Hindi. Tamil Nadu their language is Tamil, and the majority of Tamilians do not actually speak Hindi. They do get taught in school, but most of them know English better than they know Hindi. So when you're traveling in India, if you're looking for a great location to go right off the bat, it's definitely one that I would recommend. The food tends to be a lot spicier than other parts of the country. So there's a little bit more of a sweetness, a little more sugar used in parts of Bengali food, which is over in one of the coastal parts of India. Again, if you're going towards the north, they tend to use different spices and different types of dal as well. The majority of your Indian restaurants that, certainly that I've been to, tend to be kind of focused on a more northern cuisine. So that tandoori, the naan bread, a lot of that is a northern style. So the part of India that I'm from, again, being a coastal city, there's a lot of seafood as part of the culture. It tends to be river fish and prawns more than anything. Much like the rest of the country, majority is vegetarian. Or starting to break apart.
And how does your family approach a plant-based Indian preparation versus what they might be used to with dairy?
Yeah, so a lot of traditional Indian food will use butter, actually a clarified butter called ghee, in their foods, and again, a lot of different types, mustard seed oil, rapeseed oil. So it's been a challenge. The cooking that I learned was with oil. So it was kind of a personal journey for myself and my parents in working together and taking a lot of the recipes that we do traditionally, for so many years, and translating them to no oil, no dairy. And it's been fun to experiment with. So, some of the more traditional like famous dishes is like saag paneer, which is a North Indian dish, which is essentially it's almost like a cream of spinach with basically a type of cheese, paneer, that's in it. So we use tofu instead. With a lot of these Southern Indian dishes, they tend to be mostly vegetarian, so it's an easy substitute. There are some dishes that that would traditionally use chicken. We've substituted them for seitan, and the flavors hold up wonderfully. So I think it's been an easy tradition. Again, there's so many tricks for Indian food, so many substitutes and alternatives that I don't think anything has been lacking. And definitely from a vegetable perspective, some of the more exquisite food has always been from the vegetable side. So, if we take something like a banana tree, they use a leaf as a plate in Southern India, but then they'll use different parts. The flowers, will go in one dish. They'll use roots in another dish. So there are a lot of different vegetable variations that are found in Indian cooking, South Indian especially, that I've just been able to enjoy more often than the traditional, the non-vegetarian ones that I used to. So I am about ready here to add the dal. So add that. So I'm just going to scoop this in, and along with it, I'm going to add a little bit of the spices. So that's a little bit of turmeric, a quarter teaspoon, as well as a pinch of salt. So again, depending on how healthy you're trying to be, I don't think this dish actually needs a whole lot of salt. There's a lot of flavor coming in from all these spices. So start with just a pinch and almost add more to taste. This is the turmeric that I'm putting in. Usually I just go a little bit like that. That's probably about a quarter teaspoon, maybe a little less. So at this stage, you can see the dish is somewhat dry. If you want a little bit more watery, a little bit more of like a stew, you can add vegetable broth or water. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water here. So once we get this all mixed up, we're going to let this, we're going to turn the heat down to a low, and we'll simmer for 10 minutes, and we'll have a chance to finish up those rotis, which should be ready to go. How's everyone cooking at home coming along?
How you doing, Doris? Good? Ah, very good. And Roger reported he made his ahead of time.
Oh, wonderful. I actually want a little bit more water myself here. So as you can see, I'm kind of eyeballing it. I'm putting in about a quarter cup each time, just for able to gauge, and you can see how it's making it, what kind of difference it's making. And we've turned the heat down now to a low, and we'll let this simmer. I'm going to cover it for a few minutes, and then we'll uncover it right before we're ready to serve. I'll move this to the other burner. All right. So, yeah. Well, leave it here. We're going to make the rotis. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so now we're on to the final stages here. This is probably one of the more fun parts, making the rotis themselves. So we've got that bread sitting here. I'm going to knead it for another couple seconds just to kind of get it back ready to go here. You can see the nice shape that's got. I'm going to dust my board pretty generously. And as I was mentioning before, this is going to open up, this is going to break into just about 12 pieces. I'm going to try and keep that actually wet cloth in here until I use up all of it. We're going to basically grab about a little bit more, maybe like a tablespoon size, maybe a little bit more, and we're going to roll them into a ball. Grab a little bit of flour and essentially kind of flatten it out into a small circle. So a little bit about the size of my palm. At this point, we'll add a little bit more flour. And now we're ready to roll this out into those chapatis. So this is just a little small rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin, one thing that we have done in the past is we've used a mug. So the most round mug that you can find, I'll actually use this one. And this will actually do the trick. Not as graceful, but it still does the trick. I'm going to stick with the rolling pin though. And again, if you're starting to stick a little bit, just add a little bit more flour, keep it dry. And we're looking to get about 5.5 inches in diameter.
So as much as I love doing this, my chapatis never come out quite fully circular. Definitely something I need some practice on. They still taste great. You'll see it'll look more like an amoeba than a round chapati. So in terms of thickness, that's probably a couple millimeters thick. So you can see just about 5 inches in diameter. I'm just going to lay these onto a plate so that we'll have them all ready to cook in one batch. So I'm just going to make a handful of these, and then we'll start cooking. I won't do all 12.
If there are any other questions, feel free to use the chat.
This guy's almost ready here.
Someone asked, could you use an oven toaster to bake the roti?
I think you could. It cooks really nicely on just a nonstick pan, or I'm going to use a stainless steel without anything on it. I haven't baked them before, but I think your texture might be a little off. I would play around with 1 or 2. If you put it directly on the rack, I think that might be better.
Directly on the rack. Okay. And
Yeah.
Doris is asking, Doris is cooking along with you. She doesn't have a nonstick pan. Do you have any special instructions to keep it from?
I'm actually going to be cooking with a regular stainless steel. So that helps.
Great.
Yeah, cast iron would also work great. So yeah, I'm just using a regular pan. It might burn a little bit, but I'm usually okay with that. So I'm gonna bring that back over. So I'm gonna turn this on to a medium-high heat. Water. Yeah, if you don't mind lifting it up when I do.
Varun, Cheryl's asking, do you ever use a chapati flour instead of American whole wheat flour?
Usually I use dough that my parents have, and I think that's probably a chapati flour as opposed to your traditional, like your whole wheat flour here. And I'll also be honest, I don't make these that often. Go to an Indian store and you can get them pre-made. And being close to New Jersey, where my parents are, there are actually a lot of people who make large batches at home and sell them to Indian restaurants or Indian stores where you can buy them in bulk and freeze them. I think this is almost ready.
You're gonna cook them off in flame too?
Yeah, I'm gonna do both. Mind lifting it up? Oh no, I mean, do you mind holding it up to see the pan?
Is it?
Yeah. Would you want to just come over here?
That's okay.
No. All right. So I'm going to throw this right down on here, and what you'll see is you'll start to see it bubbling. That's when you know that it's ready to take off and flip. Lighting's a little strong.
So you may be able to start seeing that some of it's starting to rise a little bit. And once I get a few more bubbles in there, rises a little more, I'm going to flip it. I'm actually going to take it to the open flame. If you don't want to use finish off the cooking on an open flame, you can just continue to do so on the pan itself.
And Varun, there's nothing in it. It's just a dry pan.
Yep. And you know, I think with the flour on there and everything, it tends to not really stick until I get about 5 or 6 chapatis in. That's when I tend to have my problem. And then even then, you're usually fine to cook them like this. I'm probably a little bit more generous with the amount of flour that I put on here, so I think that helps a little bit too. You can start seeing some of the bubbles forming. And so right next to it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on an open flame, and that's actually how I'm going to finish this off. So I usually take it off when it starts getting brown on one side, getting some of those little spots. That's actually exactly what I'm looking for. And I'm going to put it right off flame. You can see that rise that happened there, and also be careful with your fingers. And I kind of just keep rotating a little bit. I probably should turn this down a little. And that'll help finish it off. So I'm going to go about just until I start seeing those spots pop up on both sides. And while I'm doing that, I did throw the other chapati back onto the stovetop. A little bit of multitasking. This part definitely not ideal for kids to do, but it is a lot of fun to watch. I will admit I did try it as a child and I burned my hand severely. So maybe that lesson was a good one.
And you'd have to do this over gas, not on electric, I'm assuming. It really needs a fire.
Yeah. So this particular trick, which I like to think of as a little bit more authentic, you need that flame.
Is that on the lowest setting or somewhere in between?
I put a little bit in between. That's usually what I find works nicely for me. And this chapati is a little bit thicker than I originally wanted to, so it's taking a little longer than I wanted. But yeah, you could go a little lower too. It'll work fine. And that is it. So this one cooked up nicely on the other side. I'm going to throw that out here to finish. So this one I did wind up rolling a little bit thinner than the first chapati. And you'll see what I'm kind of doing is kind of just keeping each side on the flame a little bit. So it's off center and kind of turning it over just a little bit at a time. You can check the back to see how it's doing. So like the other one right here, once you start seeing those brown spots starting to burn, that's when you want to take it off. If it catches fire, that's probably also a good sign to take it off. In the background, we should have this spinach getting. Yeah, so I turned the heat down a little bit. I found it wasn't quite toasty like I wanted.
Can you turn the computer or whatever your screen is a little bit so we can hear you better, Varun?
Oh yeah.
Great.
So having turned the heat down, I actually was finding it wasn't quite grilling up the same way on the underside. It is nice. It is warm to the touch, and it feels like it's cooked all the way through. It just doesn't have those spots, which I feel like are part of that fully finished chapati. And yeah, I'll call that a day. All right, so let's take a look at the spinach. I'm just going to do a little taste test to Let's see if it's to my satisfaction with spices. And as James had suggested, again, if you're making that spice mix, half of right as you're starting to do that 10-minute simmer when you're putting in the dal, that's the time to put that spice mix in and mix it up. So good for me. Again, we don't use a lot of salt in this household anymore. You definitely feel like after a few months of cutting down, you get used to it, and even a little bit of what you used to have winds up being too much. So this is ready to serve. I guess we'll do a quick plating, and then we'll be set for questions. Actually, we can open up to questions if you have them now.
Sure. I was just going to say, it's so nice to do a culinary demo in your own kitchen. You can double dip.
Exactly.
Are there any other questions? Doris, do you have a chapati to share with us? They still coming? Oh, beautiful. Take a look at Doris's video. Nice job.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's great.
Awesome.
Yes, and there was a question, has the dal been added? Yes, you had made the batch of the dal before and added it in after the spinach was
Yeah. So yeah, in my case, I let the spinach thaw out. It took me a few minutes to thaw out. Leanna, you were asking if you're using fresh spinach. We would have just let it wilt a little bit, maybe a minute or two, and then we would have added that dal in right away. So it would have saved us probably 5 or 6 minutes on the stovetop.
excellent.
And great. There we go. So this is your very traditional South Indian keerai and chapati. And from my history lesson, I guess you could technically put this inside, fold it up, and take it with you to go as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Varun. This was very entertaining.
Yeah, I'm so glad that so many of you guys were able to tune in, and Anna, thank you to Plant Powered Metro for hosting this. I think it's been really nice, certainly from a business perspective, to have something to do.
Excellent. Yes, for sure. It's amazing how many people are really getting creative in their kitchens these days, and to bring this kind of cultural flair into our Metro New York communities is really important. So thank you, and thank you, Doris, for being our taste tester here, doing it on your own in your own kitchen. Just to wrap it up for tonight, I want to encourage all of you to join us. We have a lot more great programming coming up over the next few weeks. We have tomorrow a program in the afternoon at 1 p.m. with Victoria Moran talking about weight loss and really mindset. She's got a great approach to mindset and how we can open our eyes and our hearts to plant-based lifestyle in many different ways. On Saturday night, we're hosting a Forks Over Knives watch party on Netflix, which will be followed by a discussion with the Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams. We're really excited that he's going to join us for a conversation after the movie, which has been transformative for many of us in being exposed to the principles of whole food plant-based nutrition. And you can find a lot more on our website at plantpoweredmetrony.org or www.ppmny.org. I'm going to put it in the chat box for you. Anybody who's new, who's not on our mailing list, please do join and reach out and let us know how else we can take our message of health and healing farther during this time when people are feeling very susceptible to illness. We really want to help folks feel confident in how nutrition can help on many levels, build a strong immune system and help fight those underlying conditions, which are pretty dangerous. So thanks once again to Varun and your sous chef behind the camera, and to all of you for joining us. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, and we'll hope to see you at a future program.